This morning is my opportunity to bear my soul and my witness to you as someone asked me this morning, have you ever done this before? And the answer is yes, but never to this depth. So if I get a little emotional, you'll understand why, and I'm not the first one to say that before you, but so I entitled this Second Chances, and you'll see how it connects into our Old Testament reading as I go through this. I was one of 7 children growing up, the middle child exactly, with 2 older brothers and 1 older sister, and 2 younger brothers and 1 younger sister. We were a Catholic family, and every Saturday morning I went to catechism. Every Saturday evening I went to confession. And on Sunday morning, Mom would take us to church. Dad went to church on Saturday afternoon. We lived on a 20-acre gentleman farm, as some folks would call it, because my father worked as a machinist during his regular job. And we had, on this farm, we had horses and chickens and racing pigeons and goats and geese. We had a menagerie. Dad was not always the nurturing family type, though. Most of the time, his alcoholism would get in the way, and that's when he was most physically abusive. Sometimes it was his belt that was across my back. Sometimes it was the horse reins. Being brought up under the cloud of my father taught me to fear and to learn at a young age that I was not as good as other kids. I realized this when I had to repeat the first grade. I had such a stuttering problem that I was not able to meet the requirement of being able to read out loud on the first grade level. So I repeated the first grade, which put me only 1 year ahead of my younger brother. Then in 4th grade, my teacher would often say, "Why aren't you as smart as your sister?" We had the same teacher. For many of those years, I followed her. Around this time, I started getting confused about what I was learning in church. Our priest, Father John, would talk about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The only experience I had with the Father was not a good one. I didn't want to hear about Father at home or in church. I was really feeling alone, in the world, and all indications were that I was just not good enough. By the time I got to high school, I had stopped doing my homework and was really resenting school. So much so that at the age of 17, I quit high school and joined the military. I was finally free from the destructive home life and free from homework at school and all of the academic requirements, so I thought. What I found when I was in the Army was a place where I was not judged by others. I was away from my father, away from my siblings to be compared to. I was treated as an equal. I also realized I was not as dumb as I thought. I did well through my Army training and rose quickly through the enlisted ranks. I had friends too, and sometimes we would even go to church on Sunday mornings together. I was starting to feel like God was giving me a second chance. I went on a few Catholic retreats and started to read more of the Bible. I was starting to really understand love and caring for others as Jesus' parable describes in the Good Samaritan. I realized he was referring to God the Father, and there was no connection to my earthly father. By the time my 3 years of enlistment were up, I had earned the rank of E5 sergeant. And also completed my GED. Excuse me. Had also completed my GED and had several college courses under my belt. I owed a lot to God for leading me into a life where I felt my life was valued. However, along the way, I developed my own drinking problem. Now out of the Army after 3 years and living with my older brother and his wife, I had plenty of time on my hands, not working and trying to adjust to civilian life. My older brother, Kevin, 4 years older than I, at 24, was much wiser than I was. He had given me a choice to either stop drinking or move out. I moved to Maine, following my parents and my 3 younger siblings who had moved to Newport, Maine while I was in the military. Family ties are hard to break. I did stop binge drinking, got a job, and soon was married and living with my new in-laws at the time, which was a good Methodist household. And again, I was feeling God's hand of forgiveness and a second chance. Life was good until the birth and death of my first son. My son Brian was born at only 6.5 months. And this was 1980, before we had a lot of the newer technology. He survived for 1 day. I was only 23, and my new wife was only 19 at the time. We struggled to make sense of it all. Eventually, we had 3 more children, Sarah, Jason, and Laura. And in the midst of moving into our new home, again, God was giving me a second chance. By the time Laura was 2, I was working feverishly to put a new roof on the house and working overtime to put food on the table and to buy materials for the renovation of this old house. My long hours away from home proved to be too much for my wife. After 8 years, we had decided to end our marriage. I eventually left that job that was still demanding too many hours of my time and spent the next 2 years studying electrical engineering at Maine. During this time, Pat and I met, and as a result of our Methodist connection, we had both been through divorces in the recent years leading up to that, and decided that we would form a singles group and would meet in the church that she was serving at the time in Corinna. This was a successful social gathering for folks within and outside of our church. And then in January of 1990, Pat offered to sponsor me on a Trace Diaz weekend. This was before Walk to Emmaus was available in our area. This turned out to be a spiritual kickstart for me. I became closer to God and to Jesus than I had ever been before. Over time, Pat and I realized that we had more in common than running a singles group. We were married on May 19th, 1991. And again, I felt God giving me a second chance. Pat and I have since raised our blended family of 5 children. All 5 continue to do well, and I feel blessed every day for their health and happiness. We have moved several times during Pat's ministry, and as a result, I had to leave one job and start a new search in our new community for a new job. This has not always been easy, and occasionally I've had to take a job for the sake of the paycheck. During our stay in Holton for 5 years, I was able to complete my bachelor's degree in management from Thomas College, as well as getting our kids through school. I spent time as a substitute teacher during the years that we were in Holton, and I found that I worked well as a teacher of kids and enjoyed it. Ultimately, Pat and I agreed that being a teacher would be a good fit for a pastor spouse. So I left my management job at Naturally Potatoes in Mars Hill and returned to school to become a certified teacher in Maine. While doing my student teaching, Pat was moved to Williamstown, Massachusetts. I was a new teacher without a license to teach in Massachusetts, so I worked for a year in a hardware store. During this time, the feelings of doubt crept in, and I questioned whether I was destined to teach or not. Well, God gave me a second chance when I accepted a teaching position in Pittsfield, Maine, in a residential program for troubled kids. I taught there for 2 years. The experience was great, and I felt I could relate to these kids, knowing firsthand where many of them were coming from. God was giving me a second chance once again. He was opening my eyes to many of the things that had taken me years to understand. It wasn't until several years after my father passed away that I was able to forgive him for his mistreatment of me and the rest of my family. I finally realized that he was an alcoholic with underlying mental issues. While I know that what he did and didn't do as my father was wrong, my understanding of his illness has freed me from being trapped in the cycle of negativity about my own life. As in our reading this morning from Exodus, God has... Did I skip a page? God has given us a second chance and has given me a second chance. As God gave his people a second chance with the second set of tablets that Moses had brought down from the mountain, God has given me a second chance too. Thank you for listening.